So now let's talk about the prerequisites for this particular series. As far as hardware is concerned, Bottle does not require a lot. Just like plain old Python will run on darn near anything, plain old Bottle will run on darn near anything. If you want to interact with the operating system, that'll be fine. If you want to do REST API calls, that'll be fine. Basically, the Bottle web app framework doesn't require very much to run. Where you will need more hardware resources if you decide to run things like something like Ollama, which is an AI framework on your machine. It's not that Bottle needs it, it's that Ollama needs it. Or if you're going to be running OpenCV on your machine, Bottle doesn't need the resources, OpenCV does. So that's the thing to be thinking about as far as the operating system and the hardware resources are concerned, is that Bottle can basically run off a machine from 2005. You're really not going to have any issue with it, especially for everything we're going to be going through in this series. Where you might need more hardware resources is if you start to add things to your project, and is that those additional components will need more resources, not necessarily that it's Bottle. Now, to go through the series, you do need a pretty solid basic understanding of Python. You do not have to be an expert in Python to be clear, but you do need to understand how to import modules and use functions. You do have to understand how to create custom functions. You do need to understand if-else statements, try statements, loops, those types of things. Again, it's all the basic tasks with Python, but Python is what you use to build your web app. So basically, the framework is going to be used for routing. So if you're going to go to like the index page or the about page, that's kind of sort of what Bottle is going to do for you. But then in order to create that page, it's actually going to be written out or created using Python. So you have to understand how the variable values and all of that kind of stuff works. So going forward, you will need Python for this series. And finally, you do need to understand the basic concepts of web app design. You don't have to be perfect at it. Again, you do not have to be an expert, but you kind of sort of need to know what a URL is, right? When I'm talking about DNS, we're talking about domain name or fully qualified domain name to IP address resolution, you got to have an idea of what I'm talking about there. If I'm talking about TCP ports, so when we run Bottle, we're generally going to run it on TCP port 8080. You do not have to be a CCNA, but you kind of got to understand what a TCP port is. Beyond that, again, we are going to be dynamically building web pages, and so when you write out the web pages, you're going to need HTML, hypertext markup language, to basically build the design of the page, and you will need CSS to, add in all the fancy design stuff, right? The colors, drop-down boxes, that kind of stuff. HTML is incredibly simple. You can learn it in about an hour. Don't worry about it. CSS is slightly more complicated. It might take you about 2 hours to learn, but you will need to know that. So you will need to understand the basics of how traffic gets routed within a web app. You'll need to understand the very, very basics of what a TCP port is, and you'll need to at least be able to follow along with HTML and CSS coding. So when we're writing out the web page, you have an idea of what it is I'm actually writing out. So those are the prerequisites. Really, as long as you have an adequate computer and you know Python, you should be able to go through this entire series in a day or maybe even half a day. Again, Bottle is incredibly simple. You do not need to know a lot in order to use the Bottle framework, but you do need these basic prerequisites. So if you have those, let's dive into the class.